What hurts me the most is the fact that when I brought it to the attention of the corporate underwriting manager that there were fraudulent loans being passed through, I was retaliated against. And when I thought that I would be doing something that would help, I actually did something that hurt me tremendously. I was harassed for reporting the fraud. I was retaliated against, and I simply love what I do. I'm a mortgage loan underwriter. I've been that for more than 30 years. And my job is to look out for my company and for the prospective homeowner and make sure that they are in a product that they can survive in for the 30 years that they've signed up to make those payments. By doing the right thing and reporting the fraud, it has affected me emotionally, physically, financially, and it handicaps me to this day in order to do my job. All of the loans that we found fraud in were conventional loans. And I'm a government underwriter. I do government loans. And I find myself now that I can't even think about touching a conventional loan. And so it's impacting my ability to progress at work simply because I don't take on that product. So, you know, it's unfortunate, but physically, I don't even feel comfortable inside of an office. I work from home, and it has relegated me to only be able to work from home, and that's a chore, simply because I still have to deal with management and, you know, to some degree, being forced to do a loan product that I'm uncomfortable with.
In recent years, whistleblowers have received greater attention. Time magazine made 3 whistleblowers its Persons of the Year in 2002 in honor of their exposing scandals at Enron, the FBI, and WorldCom. But for many whistleblowers, a recent New England Journal of Medicine study showed whistleblowers pay a tremendous personal cost for their disclosures, and almost 82% of them experience retaliation from employers, including being harassed, blackballed, and fired. In addition, whistleblowers face social ostracism from coworkers and undergo stressful psychological strain. As Mark Twain once wrote, "Character is doing the right thing when nobody's looking." There are too many people who think that the only thing that's right is to get by, and the only thing that's wrong is to get caught.
Lehman Brothers entered its death spiral on September 11, 2008. The stock was plummeting. Dick Fuld was advised that it was time for a fire sale of his corporate assets, but he resisted. Telephone records show that U.S. Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson spoke frequently with Fuld, but he felt his message was not getting through.
He was definitely exasperated with Dick Fuld. I think everybody was. He seemed to be unable to recognize the gravity of the situation his firm was in and unable to do the things that were needed.
On Friday, September 12th, Hank Paulson decided that it was time for drastic action to save Lehman Brothers, but he did not want to authorize another government bailout. He flew to New York on his private jet and summoned all the Wall Street CEOs to an emergency meeting at the New York Federal Reserve Building.
You know, the fire alarms are going off. The tornado siren is going. And so when the chief of police and the chief of the fire department says we need the heads of all the major employers in our town to come together to come up with a plan, you come.
At 6 p.m., Hank Paulson started that secret meeting with America's leading bank CEOs. Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan, Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs, John Thain of Merrill Lynch, and John Mack of Morgan Stanley.
I began working on a plan.
Paulson told them that they all knew why they were there. Without their help, Lehman would not open for business on Monday, and the consequences for everyone sitting around that table would be disastrous. Across town, Dick Fuld was astounded that Hank Paulson had not invited him to the crisis meeting. The crash of September 2008 brought the largest bankruptcies in world history. pushed over 30 million people into unemployment and brought many countries to the edge of insolvency. Wall Street turned back the clock to 1929.
The tremendous crowds which you see gathered outside are due to the greatest crash in the history of the New York Stock Exchange.
After the Wall Street crash of '29, which led to the Great Depression, the U.S. Congress launched an official investigation.
Interest in the senatorial bank investigation as J.P. Morgan arrives to testify.
J.P. Morgan was among the business titans to be called to account by the Pecora Commission. Flash photography was introduced to heighten the spectacle. In 2010, the same model is followed for a new investigation of a new financial collapse. Perhaps the most reviled figure to appear before the U.S. Congress in the aftermath of the meltdown was former Lehman Brothers CEO Richard Fuld. The 2008 collapse of his bank certainly caused the most damage to the world economy, and it financially ruined millions of Americans who had invested with Lehman.
I'm very much aware that one day we had a firm, the next day we did not.
At the hearings, Fuld became the prime target for a public that was angry at bankers. Dick Fuld had spent his entire career at Lehman Brothers, starting at the bottom and clawing his way up the ladder. In later years, he assumed all the trappings of unfettered power. His word was law, his judgment never to be questioned.
Consequences of this financial crisis have been grim also. 27 million Americans who are either out of work, can't find full-time work, or have stopped looking for work. Millions who have lost their homes, and millions more who are in the foreclosure process. Trillions of dollars of wealth loss. I think one of our jobs is to try to rationally explain to people what the heck happened. People want to know.
How did it all go so wrong? The key trigger of the 2008 financial meltdown was easy lending in the U.S. housing market. In an era of very low interest rates and reduced bank regulation, there was an astonishing building boom across the United States. In California, banks decided that virtually anyone could qualify for a home loan.
The way he created Lehman Brothers, it was almost a cult of personality. The personality was his personality, which was, it's us against them, we're gonna fight everybody, and we're gonna win.
Dick Fuld was determined to intimidate anyone who might cross him. In this internal Lehman UK video, he was angry that some traders were driving down his stock price.
But what I really want to do is I want to reach in, rip out their heart, and eat it before they die.
This has been an historic Sunday on Wall Street, and it's not over yet. At this hour, the Lehman Brothers Investment Bank appears headed toward bankruptcy.
With $613 billion in debt, Lehman is by far the largest bankruptcy ever in this country, dwarfing...
On the sidewalks of New York and in investment houses around the world, there was a rising sense of panic. Lehman Brothers officially declared bankruptcy at 2 a.m. There was widespread fear that could trigger a chain reaction that would take down the world banking system.
In this new insider-exclusive Investigative Network TV special, Wall Street Lehman Brothers, a Whistleblower's Nightmare, our news team goes behind the headlines on location in Oakland, California, to visit with Gary Gwilliam and Randy Strauss, partners at Gwilliam, Ivary, Chiosso, Cavalli Brewer, who represent several former employees of Lehman Brothers who worked at the BNC Mortgage subsidiary and who are very special because they complained to their superiors about fraudulent and illegal lending practices as early as 2005. Each of them was told to look the other way, and then was subjected to retaliation and harassment that was designed to force them to quit. Management brought in a new manager to sexually harass and intimidate them. Eventually, each of them was forced to leave their employment. BNC was a top 20 subprime mortgage lender in 2006. originating more than $14 billion worth of home loans. Unfortunately, shortly after these whistleblowers made their legal claims, BNC went out of business as part of Lehman Brothers bankruptcy, the largest in United States history. This caused a delay in bringing the case to justice that continues to this day. Each of these whistleblowers has been waiting 12 years for justice. It has been 10 years since BNC sought protection from the bankruptcy court. Every year that goes by adds ongoing emotional distress and additional wage loss damages. The fact that these whistleblowers experience the same sexual harassment adds to their credibility and the punitive damages value of each case. It is well past time to bring this case to a fair resolution. This case is still languishing in the New York bankruptcy courts, where it has sat for over a decade. Whistleblowers serve an important role to both their employers and to the general public by bringing to light an employer's ethical or even legal violations. Because of this, federal and state laws exist to protect certain whistleblowers from retaliation by an outed employer. The whole point of a whistleblower claim is to correct the actions engaged in by the institution that damage public safety, waste tax dollars, or violate the public trust in government. Gary Gwilliam and Randy Strauss are dedicated attorneys who advocate on behalf of their clients in cases involving employment disputes, such as unpaid wages and overtime, wrongful termination, and sexual harassment. They have earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as some of the best trial lawyers in Oakland, in California, and across the nation. Their goals, not only to get justice for their clients, but to make sure that everyone is treated with equal respect and dignity as guaranteed under the Constitution of the United States. They have built a substantial reputation by consistently winning cases other law firms have turned down. Their amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continue to provide their clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Oakland, California. It is my great pleasure to introduce today Gary Gwilliam and Randy Strauss to the show. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have you here today talking about a case that relates back to the 2007-2008 financial collapse of this country, probably the biggest collapse that I have seen and you have seen since the Depression. Tell us a little bit about, this case revolves around Lehman Brothers and a mortgage originator that they bought called BNC,
right?
Which was based in Sacramento, right?
Yes.
Okay.
This case started in Sacramento.
And if our audience, doesn't remember or unfamiliar with what was going on, there was a thing called ninja loans, which means no income, no job. You could qualify for a $600,000 loan, right. No money down, and surely enough that many of these homes were foreclosed on and taken away from people. But why were the investment houses given the green light for these? And this is the whole basis of this story, right? So tell us about your clients who are on this. And we will have Linda Weeks on here, who's one of your clients. You represented six?
We still represent six of them.
Six people. And this is a case that's been going on for 12 years?
And the case started in September of 2005.
Yeah.
And at that time, my clients, who were underwriters and who were mortgage supervisors, their job was to make sure that mortgages were properly written, began to see a lot of fraudulent mortgages coming up with phony W-2s, bank statements, wage statements, and they started rejecting these loans.
Because that was their profession, right?
That's right.
I mean, before they went to work for BNC, they had worked for other originators, and they had different rules to follow. And by the way, tell us a little bit about Linda Weeks, who we'll have her on the show in a minute.
Well, Linda Weeks was a very fine, experienced underwriter who really had pride in her job, and she just wasn't going to start authorizing a bunch of loans that were improper. And as soon as she started rejecting these loans, they turned on her viciously. and started threatening her and harassing her. Why? Money. It was all, there was just the beginning of the explosion of mortgage, and everybody can afford a mortgage. And what they did, Steve, that was very unusual is not only did they kind of threaten her with her job, but they brought in what I would call a hit person, a guy that came in to begin to sexually threaten them, make comments, not because he was trying to date them, but because he would stand up next to them, he'd walk around, he'd make vulgar comments, he made racist comments. He was threatening them, and he was brought in intentionally in order to bring them
make
in
life
line.
so miserable that they would quit.
And he succeeded, and that's eventually what happened. And our clients, to their credit, knew that writing these mortgages would not only be bad for the company, they would be bad for the potential homeowners.
So let me ask you, when these events happen at a company, right, did Linda or any of your other clients document them? You know, in our day and age, you can turn your phone on, right?
Sure.
You can turn the audio. Is there any documentation?
Sure.
Or is it a he said, she said?
No, they were writing emails and complaining to the corporate headquarters. And the word came down, we don't care about what your issues are. We want to write mortgages. Because although the mortgages might be foreclosed on eventually, we're going to be selling them into a giant Ponzi scheme, which we all know about.
I like that, a giant Ponzi scheme, because that's what it was.
That's what it was.
And eventually, Linda Weeks was the one that kind of brought the whole thing to a head, the catalyst, because the guy finally walked up who was harassing them and stood up behind her and pushed himself against her, and it freaked her out. She'd been a victim of rape in the past. She left there, and with that, 6 of these women walked out and said, we're not going to do this anymore. And that launched us into litigation that went on, and that litigation was pending when Lehman Brothers went into bankruptcy in the early part of 2008, and that just stopped this case dead in its tracks, and they became a part of the largest bankruptcy in the history of the United States that's still going on, and they're still fighting with them after all these years in this bankruptcy court in New York.
Okay, so let me ask you, you know, once you move from federal court, where this case was filed, right?
State court,
to federal bankruptcy court, because that's where it is now, right? What is, 10-year bankruptcy? That's pretty long bankruptcy.
This is the largest bankruptcy in the history of the world. And as you probably know, once the bankruptcy is filed, all litigation stops. There's a stay.
It's all stayed, So the question is, where is the resolution here?
Well,
because when Lehman Brothers filed bankruptcy, I was doing a little research on this, they had something like $600 billion in assets. And I don't know whether that was assets based on their fictitious mortgage-backed securities or they were real assets.
Well, they were real assets, many of them. They had a lot of holdings of real estate property. Ironically, what's happened, Steve, is that over a period of time, as we've come out of the recession, the assets of Lehman Brothers have increased, and they begin to finally pay off these loans.
What about your clients?
Well, that's the sad part, is that they've been giving us nothing but trouble. They contacted us 4 years ago in 2013 and said, hey, we want to settle your cases, and they should. We knew they had money. We hired a bankruptcy lawyer to work with us. They have a specific amount of money, $17 or $18 million, available primarily for these women. And guess what? All they've done is given us trouble, and Randy can speak to this too. They have continually found one reason or another to avoid paying them anywhere near a fair settlement, and that's still going on.
Let me hear some of these reasons. You said there's $17 million that are available to pay these women and other former employees?
No, there were some other claimants against BNC. They have a specific trust fund for BNC, but most of these claims have been paid off. So the largest viable claim is the Colombo case. But what they've done is they've said, well, somebody else is going to take money out of there. We can't pay you because there's other claims. And that's, Randy can kind of speak to this.
Well, ironically, they have claims against them by people who bought the very fraudulent mortgages that they were selling. Those folks have a huge claim against Lehman Brothers. These are banks who want some of this money. And so Lehman is using that as an excuse to say, we can't settle with your ladies who, ironically enough, if it had been listened to, these fraudulent mortgages would never have been sold in the first place. They're using that as an excuse not to resolve our claims.
Wasn't some settlement with the government made where some of these people the banks, paid in some money for selling crap, basically, and this money was distributed to some of the other banks that were creditors on this?
That may be. I'm not sure politically where that came down. I know that within the Lehman Brothers,
Kamala Harris was involved with that when she was Attorney General.
There have been some other litigation by AGs and states and other people that have gotten some of the money back.
Yeah.
But all I know is that there's nobody like this who's any claimant against this company or anybody else. These people were whistleblowers, and as Randy said, if there's anybody that should be treated fairly in the bankruptcy court, it's these people. And Lehman Brothers continues to unfairly treat them, in my opinion, and I think it's an outrage.
Okay, so 4 years ago you were contacted. Any news since that time?
Well, we've had mediations, we've had discussions. They make one excuse, they make another.
Have they offered anything? Have they offered anything?
Yeah.
They've offered peanuts compared to what these folks have lost. Pennies on the dollar, not enough to frankly net them anything.
Right.
And they have rightly rejected these offers because it makes no sense.
Right. Let's talk about retaliation because they're whistleblowers. They blew the whistle. They did what they thought was right. Okay. What protection does anybody have from retaliation by their employer?
Well, it's illegal under state and federal law to retaliate, meaning take any adverse action in the workplace against an employee who is a whistleblower. So if you go to your boss and you say, this company is doing something wrong and illegal and it should be stopped, your boss is legally precluded from taking any action against you.
Right.
That's called a whistleblower.
Right.
How do you prove retaliation?
Well, if you make a complaint and the very next day your boss comes in and says, you know what, although you've been working here successfully for years, we've decided it's time for a change, we're letting you go.
So it's circumstances, basically.
Very often.
They start getting bad performance reviews. All of a sudden, they've been doing great up until the time they make complaints, and then suddenly everybody turns on them and they can't do anything right. And this is what we call the pretext. So they oftentimes use that to either fire them or drive them out of the company by coming up with phony reasons to why they're not performing properly.
Is whistleblowing the same thing? Blowing the whistle. It's the precursor to retaliation, correct?
Oftentimes,
it's one of the main reasons that people are retaliating against, because companies don't want to hear that they're doing wrongdoing, and sometimes they're very serious wrongdoing issues.
Right.
But as Randy said, fortunately, there's both state and federal laws that protect whistleblowers, although to be honest with you, Steve, these protections are a little more illusory than you might think. There's still a lot of whistleblowers that are not treated right. Look at these women. For all these years, we're talking about 12 years, and they're still in litigation. You see case after case of whistleblowers that are harassed, they get out, they can't get a job, they've been blackballed. Whistleblowers are not treated with the respect and dignity that they should be.
And I do want to bring, we've done a number of whistleblower shows. I do want to bring up the fact that when you decide that you want to do the right thing, you oftentimes put yourself in harm's way.
This absolutely changed these ladies' lives.
Not only that, but if you're married, you have a good job, your wife, your husband may say to you, why'd you do that? We're losing our house, we don't have income, you can't get a job. All things to take in consideration.
Yeah, but Steve, we must have whistleblowers.
Of course.
Only people that can keep the government and companies straight, because management's not going to do that.
Yeah.
So when people stand up and see wrongdoing, do the right thing, we need to encourage that. We need to make sure that they're treated right, and that has not been successfully done, in my opinion, by government or private industry.
Right now, we have one of your clients, Linda Weeks, with us, and we're going to bring her on right now.
Great.
It is my great pleasure to introduce Linda Weeks to the show. Welcome to the show, Linda.
Thank you.
Tell our audience a little bit about, you worked at BNC before, which is owned by Lehman Brothers, right?
Yes.
And you were a mortgage underwriter, is that correct?
That is correct.
So basically that job means that you're the one that approves or disapproves loans.
That is correct.
And how many years had you been doing this prior to working at BNC?
At least 20 years into underwriting.
You have been through many periods of time where you've seen conventional loans, if you will. You had to put down 20% or 10% or whatever. You had to have a job. You had to qualify, because a bank wouldn't want to lend money to someone who's not going to pay it back, right?
That is correct.
But the whole picture changed in the early 2000s when you had mortgage-backed securities, when supposedly under the Bush administration, we were going to get everybody a home, correct?
Yes.
And you saw more and more loan applications that were coming in, which were, as typically known, no income, ninja loans, no income, no job loans.
That is correct.
People without any money whatsoever, correct?
That is correct.
And they were getting approved.
Yes.
How'd you feel about that?
Well, I felt horrible about it.
But you were told to get them approved anyway, right?
Yes, they have guidelines that we had to follow, and if they met those guidelines...
You mean like no job, no income?
Well...
Is that the guideline?
No, the guideline is that you submit the fact that you do have a job.
Yeah.
And you indicate how long you've been doing that job,
yeah.
but no one's verifying it.
Okay.
So you can pretty
much...
So
you lie, basically.
Yes.
So you were not required to verify whether they had a job or how much money they were making. Typically, like with a tax return or something like that, right?
Right. It was minimal documentation.
Yeah, yeah.
Minimal documentation.
So you went to your bosses and you said, this is crazy, right?
Well, the situation occurred where I was reviewing a loan, and I realized that the bank statements had been altered.
Altered?
Yes, in that the deposits didn't add up, the typeset didn't match, and it was very obvious that the amounts didn't add up.
And this was submitted to you by the would-be borrower, right?
It's called third-party origination. So there is an originator that originates a loan, and then he submits that entire loan package to the company I was working for, BNC Lehman Brothers.
So you brought this to the attention of your manager?
Yes, I brought this to the attention of the underwriting manager.
Yeah.
I took copies of the items that I felt were fraudulent, and I did what we consider asset tests on them, where I would pick up the phone and just make a cold call and ask for the person who filled out the document or whatever the case was.
Yeah.
And we would find out more times than not that they didn't even know who we were talking about.
Yeah.
They were not a company.
Yeah.
And, you know, so therefore it turns out that the information was falsified.
Right. So what led you to finally blow the whistle on BNC management?
The straw that broke the camel's back for me is the fact that there was a gentleman there that had been hired. His name was Daniel Keenan. And no one really knew what his job title was, but I immediately felt very uncomfortable around him and some of his mannerisms, things he said, and how he approached women and how he held onto my hand when he first shook it. So some of those things all bothered me, and it continued to bother me. When I started to find the fraud and started to report it to my superior, then that kind of made the originators a little unsettled because they were no longer going to be getting paid if I found the fraud.
Right.
So I was kind of like ostracized, and people were told not to come to me for direction and don't let me underwrite certain files.
Mm-hmm.
I found 5 files in one day from one company, and that kind of put the spotlight on how widespread the fraud was.
Yeah. So let me ask you this question. How many mortgage underwriters were there at BNC?
3.
When you were there? 3.
Yes.
So the other 2 people also your clients?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So everybody was in unison saying, hey, this isn't right.
Yes.
And when you're saying this isn't right, you knew, or did you know, that what Lehman Brothers would do was package these BS loans in mortgage-backed securities and sell them off with AAA ratings that were bogus too, to people who would pay Lehman Brothers, right?
Yes.
So they would be making an underwriting fee. You knew that all that was happening.
Yes. Yes, that is, you know, the nature of the beast.
And it was not only happening with BNC, but it was also happening across the country.
Yes, it was.
With trillions of dollars of loans.
Many loans, millions of loans were being handled in that manner.
So what led you again to decide to say enough is enough?
Well, when I realized that management didn't seem to care about the fraud, and I want to protect my reputation, and I am known for being conservative. I was known as being a very good underwriter, and I wanted to keep that reputation. So I began to seek employment elsewhere. And I had a job offer, so I was going to be moving on to that job. Prior to me leaving, I needed to clean up some things, match some documents to files, and just make sure that my desk was in order before I resigned.
Mm-hmm.
In doing that, Daniel Keenan would constantly walk around the office. He simulated masturbation. He licked his lips at you. He did all kind of foul things.
Yeah.
I stayed in my office for the most part, but
You were
realized,
afraid of him. You were afraid of him.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Knowing that I needed to do some things to make sure that my files were accurate and all the information was placed in it, I knew I had to leave out to go into the file room, which is where his desk was.
Right.
He shared that office with another young lady. Her name was Linda Harris. She too knew about the fraud, but in my opinion, she was participating in it. Well, when I realized she was in the office, I felt that I could go in there into the file cabinet and I would be safe. So I did that. I walked in. Daniel was sitting at his desk. Linda was sitting in a desk next to him, Linda Harris. And when I turned my back to open up the file cabinet, all of a sudden, he was in back of me. He put his hand on my shoulder, breathed down my neck, and then he pushed his genitals against my backside, pushing me into the file cabinet. I panicked. I was in shock that this was happening. I just couldn't believe it in a matter of seconds. And I didn't realize I was in the room alone with him. So I don't know when Linda Harris left out. But apparently, quietly, she did. And when I realized what Daniel was doing and that I was in there alone, I pushed back and I just ran out of the office. I thought I ran out screaming because of how I felt inside.
Mm-hmm.
But they tell me that I wasn't, that they just was told I ran out of the office. And when I came back upstairs into my office, that's when I found out that I wasn't the only woman that was being sexually harassed and seeing Daniel do the things that I saw him doing. We shared information and realized that he was doing this to all of us.
Yeah.
And, at that point, I am a rape survivor and I have panic attacks. And I had just a full-blown panic attack that I just couldn't even hardly speak. I could just say enough to Colleen to call the attorney and call the attorney now, because I felt like too many women had been harassed along with myself. But I was 2 weeks, I would have been gone.
Yeah.
So I was kind of taking care of it for myself.
Yeah.
Then I realized I was leaving women behind that had the same issues that I had suffered through.
Yeah. Let me just add a thing or two, Steve. First of all, the 6 women we represent were co-workers. They weren't necessarily friends, and they didn't have any idea that all of them were suffering from exactly the same thing. We have 6 witnesses that show exactly what she was talking about with this Daniel Keenan, and even worse, with comments he was making that were both sexual and racial to one of our Latino clients. So we have that. Secondly, what I want to say is that these are brave women and whistleblowers, and I'm very proud to represent Linda for all these years. She not only stood up for what she believed in, but she has had the courage and the tenacity to stay with this case for all of these years and not give up. And you ask her now, she's not giving up, and we will not give up until we get justice in this case. I don't care how long it takes.
Yeah, that's the reason we're doing this show, because we certainly hope by national exposure that something is done positively for you.
I hope you're right about that.
And I want to thank you very much for being on the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have a lot of people that come into your office. They have cases, they have claims. How do you select the clients that you eventually represent?
Well, first of all, we get to know the client, and we have to be assured that they're someone of integrity who has the strength to pursue a case.
Yeah.
Some people aren't up to it, unfortunately.
We have to be very selective in the cases we take, because once we take a case like this, we may be into it for a long time, a lot of money, like this case, like the Andrews case and other cases we live here. We take less than 1 out of 100 cases that come into our office. But when we take them, we never give up. If we take them, we're in this for the long run, and we will fight them to the end. So I'm very proud of the fact that our firm has been doing this for many, many years and will continue to do this. But we have no fear. We're ready to take on the big guys. And once we take on a client, we're in it for the long run.
Okay. I want to thank both of you for being on this show, and great job. We hope this gets resolved.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.